Louisa stared at her for several minutes and still didn't recognize her. Her closest childhood friend, the one she used to climb trees with in the courtyard of this very building, was standing just a few steps away, and Louisa had no idea who she was looking at. Here's what it looked like. From Świętochłowice, late July 2025. Louisa is standing by the entrance of her building, watching as a woman is led out of the neighboring apartment on the second floor. Led isn't quite the right word. Held up, practically carried, because the woman can't manage the stairs on her own. Her legs are so swollen it's visible even from the street. Her walk is the kind where every single step seems to require its own decision. On one side of her head, a bald patch. On the other, matted clumps of hair that clearly hadn't been brushed in a very long time. The neighbors, when they were later asked, would all say the same thing. She looked like a very strange woman. Louisa watches. An ambulance is parked by the entrance. The medics say something to the woman. She responds. What exactly? You can't hear from the street. Then they seat her inside, and the vehicle pulls away. It's only several hours later that it hits Louisa. That woman with the bald patch and the swollen legs, the one she'd just watched being taken away without recognizing, that was Mirella. The same neighbor she used to climb trees with in the courtyard, the one who, over 20 years ago, maybe longer, simply stopped appearing, and everyone assumed she'd moved away somewhere. She's 42 years old. Outside, it's a hot Polish summer. This isn't some remote village or abandoned settlement. This is an industrial city in Silesia. From this building, it's a 5-minute walk to City Hall. People pass by here every day. On the second floor of an ordinary apartment building in the center of a Polish city, police discovered a woman, the very same woman that neighbors had considered missing for 27 years. Medics examined her on site and made the decision to hospitalize her immediately. So the question that comes up right away and doesn't let go is this: how is that even possible? How does a person vanish in the middle of a city? Not in a basement, not in a forest, not thousands of kilometers from home, but in the apartment where they were born. In a building where everyone knows each other, 50 meters from City Hall, and no one finds them for 27 years? The answer exists, but it's not simple. Not a single teacher from that time will remember her at all. Not a face, not a single episode. One semester, and a complete void in the memory of those who should have known her. 1997. Mirella is 15. She lives in the same housing block in Świętochłowice where she was born. Familiar faces, ordinary life in a Silesian industrial town. A neighbor, the one journalists will track down years later, will remember one specific moment. Mirella's mother boasted to her that her daughter had been admitted to the first class at Jan Kochanowski Lyceum. Good news. The parents were pleased. Everything looked normal. The fall semester of 1997 passes without incident. At least, no trace remains in any archive. Danilyuk will find her name in the enrollment lists 27 years later and say it plainly, __quote _0 ___. It's hard to explain and yet perfectly explainable. One semester. A quiet student in a large class who didn't have time to stand out, not for better, not for worse. Students like that don't get remembered. The courtyard remembered her better. Mirella was part of the landscape. Not the center of it, but not a shadow either. Just one of their own. After that semester, she never appears again. Not at school, not in the courtyard, not at the neighbors. She simply ceases to exist for everyone who knew her, and therefore for the entire world. In the archives of Jan Kochanowski Lyceum, a short entry survives, enrolled September 1997, withdrawn at the parents' request in January 1998. No explanation was attached to the application. Simply, we request withdrawal. Danilyuk found this entry 27 years later. She didn't work at the school at the time. She simply pulled the old enrollment lists. __quote _1 ___, she would tell journalists. 4 months and a line in the archive. The principal of elementary school number 8, where Mirella had studied before that, Marek Planta, would later reconstruct a different picture from the records. A good student, no complaints. Everything on time. In elementary school, nothing suggested what was to come. Elementary school ended, and she never appeared in official records again. Around the same time, the neighbors stopped seeing her too. Someone would ask her mother, and the mother would explain, differently to each person. No one compared the explanations, no one put them side by side. There was simply no reason to, and that's exactly how the mechanism worked. Not a conspiracy, not an organized cover-up, just a series of short, convenient answers, each one closing the question just enough for the person to turn around and walk away. The apartment door closes. The curtains are drawn. Outside, an ordinary courtyard, an ordinary city. And no one asks anymore. Until the age of 18, the Polish education system was required to know where every student was. After that, no. And it was precisely on that boundary that everything happened. In 1998, compulsory education in Poland ended with the completion of elementary school. After that, a student was already beyond the zone of state responsibility. A 15-year-old could simply drop out, and the system was not obligated to look for them. Principal Danilyuk explains it directly. Back then, the education system didn't concern itself with older students. Today, if a student under 18 drops out, the principal is required to alert the authorities. In 98, no. Moreover, current practice requires a certificate of enrollment at another school. Back then, that wasn't required either. A statement from the parents and a line in the archive, nothing more. And that's exactly what happened with Mirella. School was the only place she went every day, the one place where her absence could be noticed by someone whose job it was to notice. When that channel closed, through a completely legal application, she ceased to exist for the system. Not a single violation. Everything filed correctly. Then another layer. In 2000, Mirella turned 18. Under Polish law, every adult citizen residing in the country is required to have an identity document. But the document is issued on application. No automatic mailing, no system tracking who applied and who didn't. Mirella didn't apply. The city never sent her a single letter about it. This was later confirmed by Zenon Zachodny. So, 2 years after vanishing from the school rolls, she became an adult citizen without a single document. Invisible. And once again, entirely within the law. But that only explains the first layer. Why there's no document, that's clear. Why in 27 years no doctor, no social worker, no police officer ever appeared nearby, that's a different question. And the answer will turn out to be far heavier. Not everyone asked, not insistently. But when someone has been part of the courtyard for years and then vanishes, people notice. And each one received their own answer. To the neighbor Isa, the mother said Mirella had disappeared. To someone else, that she'd been taken. To a third, that she'd gone back to her biological parents. 3 different versions, 3 different explanations, and each one shut down the conversation exactly as much as needed. That's the kind of story that's hard to believe. And that's precisely why people believed it. When an explanation sounds like something out of a crime report, it doesn't demand verification, it demands sympathy. And the neighbors sympathized and stopped asking. The mechanism worked for one reason. No one ever compared the versions. Isa didn't know what the neighbors across the landing had been told. Those neighbors didn't know what Isa had heard. Everyone held their own explanation and considered it complete. As journalists would later establish, the parents maintained several parallel stories over the course of many years. They didn't lie once and go silent. They did it systematically, for different people, selecting the right version for the right listener. This wasn't spontaneous deception. This was work. And here's what's important. From the outside, the building looked perfectly ordinary. An elderly couple going to the store, occasionally to services at the Evangelical Church of St. John the Baptist, which stands a few blocks away. No scandals, no complaints. From the outside, an ordinary apartment, an ordinary elderly couple. Which brings up the question that practically asks itself, the family doctor, the social worker. Where were they all those years? The answer exists, and it will turn out to be heavier than you might assume. Vice President of Świętochłowice Tomasz Kaczmarek would later say publicly, a system that didn't see its own citizen for that many years. And he added, "These people weren't living underground. You need to understand this physically. In an agglomeration of nearly 200,000 residents, the block where Mirella lived sits right in the center. Municipal security is nearby. Across the street, administrative buildings." She wasn't in some remote place or a house on the edge of a field. She was in an ordinary apartment building, second floor, 100 meters from city government. Not a single police call to that address in 27 years. That's not speculation. That's the official position of the City Police Press Office. Deputy Commissioner Anna Okriniak confirmed it directly. No alarm signals were ever received about this family. No one ever reported a missing family member. Not a single inquiry was ever received at this address. The director, Monika Spocek, would tell journalists, "The center operates on the basis of applications, referrals, and court orders. If there's no signal, there's no action." There was never a signal. From the outside, the apartment looked like any other. An elderly couple, a clean stairwell, an ordinary door. Windows like everyone else's, except one. In one room, they were always tightly drawn. But drawn curtains aren't a signal. Lots of people keep their curtains closed. And that's precisely why the next question, about documents, insurance, medical care, becomes truly frightening. Because the answer means the system didn't just fail to notice, it had no single point of entry through which it could have noticed. On July 29th, the medics entered the apartment and saw the result, not the process. What happens to a person after 27 years of never going outside, never seeing a doctor, never moving? Her legs were so swollen it was the first thing you saw. The police officer, who had come for an entirely different reason, watched as Mirella barely moved her feet. On the staircase, she stopped and said she didn't remember how to go downstairs. Not that she couldn't, that she didn't remember. Movement had become something that needed to be relearned from scratch. Louisa would visit her in the hospital and see her friend's legs. Later, she'd tell journalists in a single phrase, "Open wounds down to the bone. Sepsis." The director of emergency medical services in Katowice, Łukasz Pach, would confirm her condition was critical. The doctor told Mirella directly, a few more days and she wouldn't have survived. Not weeks, days. The wounds on her legs weren't fresh. Something like that doesn't develop in a week. And how old they were, the sources don't specify. But they had already reached the stage where the infection had begun to work systemically. In the hospital, other things became apparent as well. She had to relearn how to eat with a fork, not in the sense that she was clumsy, in the sense that the skill required actual restoration, same with the shower. They gave her a phone. She asked, "What am I supposed to do with this?" A smartphone, an unfamiliar object. And here's the hardest part. 2 adults were beside her the entire time. They saw what her legs looked like. They saw that she wasn't getting up. They knew she had never been to a doctor. And as the investigation would later state, the condition in which she was found could not have gone unnoticed. It accumulated over years, and the whole time, the door to the room opened and closed again. In Poland, an identity document is issued on application, not automatically at 18, not based on city residency, on application, which you must come and file yourself. No one tracks who has done it and who hasn't. There is no registry of citizens without documents, no system of reminders, no inspector who checks. Mirella didn't file an application. No one did. When she turned 18 in 2000, the city didn't send her a single letter, and that wasn't a violation. Officials had no obligation to do so. The system simply didn't account for such a scenario. From there, the chain unfolds on its own. No document, no insurance, no medical file, no official doctor visit, no entry in a registry, no tax record, no pension record, not a single database in which she would have appeared as a living person on Polish territory. Deputy Commissioner Anna Okriniak put it officially and briefly. The individual in question was not listed in any database as missing or wanted. She wasn't listed anywhere at all, because no one had reported her missing. The parents told the neighbors she had disappeared, but they never contacted the police. She registered in the system as a person who simply showed no activity. Citizens like that, without transactions, without inquiries, without documents, the system doesn't know how to find. It knows how to respond to requests. No requests were made. As journalists would later analyze, there's another technical detail. In Poland, identity document issuance isn't tied to a specific locality. A resident of Świętochłowice could obtain a document at any office. Offices weren't required to share this information with each other. The system is so decentralized that even if someone had wanted to check whether Mirella appeared in any registry, there was no single window for such a check. Prosecutor Izabela Kanapik from the Katowice District Prosecutor's Office would describe it as a systemic failure in which a person could literally not exist for the state, without requiring any active steps from those around them. School closed in January 1998. No documents appeared in 2000. Medical care? Never. Social services? Never. And everything else? Also never. 27 years and not a single point at which the system was obligated to notice her. July 29, 2025. One of the neighbors hears noise through the wall. Sounds like an argument. Calls the police. This isn't a search for Mirella. Not the result of an investigation, not a signal from social services. It's a domestic disturbance call, one of thousands that come into the police every day. A neighbor heard voices. Called, that's all. A local officer arrives at the address, knocks on the door. An elderly woman opens it, around 80. She speaks calmly. Had an argument with her husband. Husband left. Everything's fine. We live here, just the two of us. Standard situation. No previous calls to this address in all those years, no entries in any alert registries, no grounds for further action. The officer is almost ready to leave. And at that moment, someone else steps out from behind a half-open door. The woman moves with difficulty. The officer sees swollen legs, visibly damaged, barely supporting her. It's not the kind of thing you can overlook. He asks a question. She answers, "Everything's fine, no help needed." The officer calls an ambulance, not because he suspected something serious, but because the condition of her legs looked life-threatening. Standard procedure when a person clearly needs medical attention. No investigation, no warrant. Just something you can't look at without reacting. The ambulance crew arrives, examines her, makes the decision to hospitalize immediately. And on that day, the officer could have turned around at the doorstep without seeing anyone except the elderly mother, if the door had opened just a little less, and if the neighbor had decided not to call. Mirella steps out onto the stairwell, medics and officers at her side holding her up because she can barely walk. She looks around as she descends. And then she says something that ends up in the medical records. Something the director of emergency services, Łukasz Pach, would later relay to journalists almost word for word. She couldn't believe how nice the stairwell looked after the renovation, that she hadn't been out here in 20 years, and "Please help me," finally, surprise, at a stairwell. The officer speaks with her. She responds coherently, says everything's fine, no help needed. She didn't go out on her own, didn't want to. According to prosecutor Kuśmierska, who later relayed the investigative testimony, Mirella explained it as health problems and shame. Louisa finds out what happened that same day. She goes to the hospital. And here's what she would later tell journalists. Mirella told her and her partner that they had saved her life, that they called the police, and that's how she got out. Louisa had called because of the noise through the wall. She had no idea Mirella was in there. Mirella credited her with the rescue. And Louisa herself, it seems, didn't fully understand in that moment what had just happened. The official police position after the initial contact is restrained. The press office put it this way: the preliminarily established circumstances do not confirm that the woman was being held against her will. The first interview was conducted without a psychologist in the apartment where the parents lived, though they were not present during the conversation. At that point, the investigation hadn't started yet. The story hadn't yet become a story, just a hospitalization due to a medical condition. Poland didn't know about it yet. 30 years ago, they used to climb trees together in the courtyard. Friends. In the hospital, a different kind of work begins. Mirella had never been insured, had never seen a doctor. She would say this to investigators herself, and prosecutor Kuśmierska would confirm it. The testimony is being verified, but so far, not a single medical record or specialist visit has contradicted it. She's given insurance. Social workers begin processing her documents, and here's what those helping her at the hospital notice. She's delighted by coffee from a machine. She'd never tried it before. She remembers the taste of condensed milk from a tube, something from childhood, the only thing that remained from the other side of January 1998. Strangers, former neighbors, and volunteers launch a fundraiser. They write about her online. Poland learns the story in October. Fact publishes the first piece. Others pick it up. And then, in early October, after 2 months in the hospital, Mirella asks to be discharged, taken back to her parents, to the same apartment. The doctor signs the discharge on October 14, 2025. The story is already public. Fact ran the piece, the rest followed. The investigation has officially begun. Poland expects the obvious. Who did this? And when will they be arrested? Prosecutor Sabina Kuśmierska gives the first official comment. Mirella was interviewed. The interview took place in the apartment where she lives with her parents. They were not present during the conversation. Kuśmierska relays the testimony without omission. According to Mirella herself, for over 20 years she did not leave the residence, but voluntarily. No one held her. No one forced her to stay. It was her decision. And then, a detail that stops you in your tracks. The doors were always open. She could have walked out. Police issue an official statement. The preliminarily established circumstances do not confirm that the woman was being held against her will. No grounds for initiating a blue card procedure were identified either. The forced confinement theory, the one Poland had accepted as self-evident, officially falls apart. Kuśmierska adds another fragment of testimony. Mirella speaks of health problems and school struggles, and of shame. The longer she stayed home, the more ashamed she became of her ailing legs, and the harder it became to step outside. The officer who spoke with her noted, she spoke logically, coherently, and consistently, and this is where Poland finds itself at a loss. On one hand, what the medics found, wounds down to the bone, sepsis, 42 years without a doctor. On the other, the official position of the investigation. She stayed voluntarily. The doors were open. These facts don't sit side by side. Something between them doesn't add up. But naming that something, for now, is impossible. While Mirella lies in the hospital relearning how to eat with a fork, her parents do something that the neighbors witness. That same day, the day the ambulance takes Mirella away, the parents begin cleaning out her room. The neighbors see it with their own eyes. Bundles of garbage wrapped in blankets are carried out of the apartment. Old newspapers, bags of sweets. Mostly the father carries them, an elderly, unhealthy man, hauling bundle after bundle downstairs. One of the neighbors would later tell the program Państwo w Państwie he was carrying something wrapped in a blanket. I didn't go look. I didn't want to smell that. Journalists from Fact managed to obtain photographs of what was thrown out, a blanket and a bedspread covered in feces. On some of them, cat litter. The publication's sources offered a theory. It was likely spread deliberately to absorb the smell. Fact labels this as a source's account, not an established fact, but the litter on the blankets is what was visible in the photographs. One more detail noted by the same sources. The mother doesn't visit Mirella in the hospital, not once in 2 months. The father visits. The mother, never. Meanwhile, in the hospital, Mirella is recorded on a dictaphone by someone, anonymously. That fragment would later air on Polsat News. Her voice is lively, quick. She's clearly glad to be talking to someone, and she says, "Those 30 years, it's just a black hole, emptiness, just me, alone with myself, locked in a room, not a complaint, a statement," as if she were describing the weather. And here's what the investigation would note separately. The room where she lived was the only dirty space in the apartment. The other rooms, according to those who saw them from the inside, were kept in order, clean, well-maintained. A single door separated one world from another, and the parents knew that door from both sides. Over 2 months in the hospital, volunteers raise more than 70,000 zloty online for dental treatment, rehabilitation, clothing. People from across Poland sending money to a woman from Świętochłowice. Alexandra, the organizer of the fundraiser, writes about her. She doesn't know how to identify what she wants because she only remembers the taste of condensed milk from a tube. Most things she's never tried. Social workers process the paperwork. Mirella receives her first ever identity document at age 42. She's granted a disability pension and assigned a significant degree of incapacity. In parallel, the investigation gains momentum. Prosecutor Kuśmierska announces a follow-up interview with a psychologist present to evaluate Mirella's mental state and capacity for independent decision-making. The parents have not yet been interviewed. No charges have been filed against anyone, and in early October the doctors are ready to discharge her. That's when she says she wants to go home, to her parents, to the same apartment. And it's not a slip. It's an officially recorded expression of will, later confirmed by both the prosecutor's office and social services. The doctor signs the discharge. An ambulance takes her back to the same building, the same street, the same apartment on the second floor in the center of Świętochłowice. Luisa doesn't understand. Alexandra doesn't understand. As the investigation would later establish, she had no other housing, no other life, only this apartment, the walls and the people. Poland thought the story was over. The woman was found, treated, now, justice. But Mirella went back to the place she'd been carried out of, voluntarily, with documents in her pocket. Journalists from Zero arrive in Świętochłowice, not on assignment from the investigation, but to check what's happening behind the closed door now that the story is known across Poland. They climb the stairwell and, still at the door, hear a woman's voice, screaming, complaining of being struck, asking for help. The journalists call the police. A patrol arrives. Officers stand at the door and ask the mother to open it. Multiple times, the mother refuses. Once, again, no result. The journalists capture all of it on video. A neighbor living door to door says it plainly. "We hear it. There's nothing we can do." That's not the only episode. Super Express and other outlets report police were called to this address repeatedly after Mirella's return, and every time, the same thing. The mother doesn't open. The patrol leaves. The same pattern that worked for 27 years. A door behind which, officially, nothing is happening. In 2025, after the story had already made its way across the country, in December, friends come with a birthday gift. The first time in decades that someone wanted to sing for her. The door doesn't open. Friends say, "We visit." The investigation says, "We observe." The prosecutor's office says there are no grounds for detention at this time, and behind the door, screaming. And that's when Vice President Kaczmarek goes to court, files a motion for compulsory placement. It's the only legal instrument left at that point, and the court accepts it and sets a hearing date, February 2026. The investigation continues. 7 months in, Prosecutor Izabela Knapik from the Katowice District Prosecutor's Office publishes an official statement. Medical documentation has been collected. A broad circle of witnesses has been interviewed. Medical and psychological evaluations have been obtained. And then, the sentence that Poland reads several times over. The evidentiary material collected to date, including the victim's testimony, has not at this stage provided grounds for filing charges against anyone. The parents remain uninterviewed. The investigation awaits 2 reports, a victimological profile and a supplemental forensic medical evaluation. Only after those will the next procedural steps be determined, including the parents' procedural status, meaning it's still unknown whether they'll be treated as witnesses or suspects. On February 10th, social workers from the Municipal Social Assistance Center arrive for a scheduled visit. The director comes personally. The door doesn't open, and Vice President Kaczmarek immediately files a motion with the court for Mirella's compulsory placement. The court takes it up. The hearing is set for March 31st, 2026. In parallel, a blue card procedure is initiated, the official framework for documenting domestic violence. Oversight of the investigation is transferred to the District Prosecutor's Office. The National Prosecutor's Office issues a statement. The case is being monitored. Morella receives a pension. She's been assigned a significant degree of incapacity. A social worker is supposed to visit once a week, but the family declined the service. She's entitled to a personal assistant. The matter remains unresolved. A court-appointed guardian is needed, but hasn't been assigned yet. And that's how it looks now. The state stands at a closed door and waits for the next hearing. The second interview was conducted at the courthouse. A psychologist sat beside her. Morella confirmed her testimony. The psychologist noted, the testimony was logical, consistent, and detailed. No confabulation. That's a clinical term meaning the person isn't filling in memory gaps with invented stories. She was saying what she genuinely remembered and believed it. The prosecutor ultimately gave journalists one sentence: she was ashamed of her ailing legs. The longer she stayed home, the greater that shame grew and the stronger the internal barrier to stepping outside became. That's the entire mechanism. No lock, no chain, no threat. Shame and time, which multiplied it. January 1998. Problems at school. Something wrong with her legs. The parents pull her out of Lyceum. Most likely it seemed temporary, until she got better. But she didn't get better. A month passed. 3, 6. And going outside meant being seen. By neighbors, acquaintances, people who remembered her as a schoolgirl. A year at home, and it's already harder than before. 2 years. Harder still. By the 10th year, it's no longer a barrier you can push past with willpower. It's a wall the person built themselves, brick by brick, without noticing. Kuśmierska put it plainly. She herself couldn't fully explain why. Not that she didn't want to explain. She couldn't. The mechanism operated below the level of words. From the inside, every day she didn't go out made the next day slightly more impossible. And by 2025, on the outside, 27 years had passed, but on the inside, it was simply a very long stretch during which going out was not an option. The investigation accepted the psychologist's assessment and concluded there are no grounds to consider the confinement forced, but there's a question that assessment doesn't close. Who decided in January 1998 that it was acceptable not to attend school? Who, in the years that followed, didn't take her to a doctor until her legs became what the medics found? Who cleaned the apartment on the day the ambulance took her away? The treadmill of shame begins with the first step. But who made that first step possible? The investigation is still working to determine. Louisa still can't explain how she didn't recognize her. They grew up in the same building, went to school together, and then Morella just disappeared. Louisa, like everyone else, accepted someone's version and moved on. 27 years later, she stood in the courtyard and watched as a hunched woman with bandaged legs was carried out. She recognized her later, from the news. This isn't about Louisa. It's about how invisibility works. As of March 2026, the investigation continues. No charges have been filed against anyone. Everyone is waiting for the victimological profile and the additional medical evaluation. After that, the parents will be interviewed in a procedural capacity corresponding to the evidence. What capacity exactly has not been disclosed. On March 31st, the court will hear the motion for compulsory placement. Until then, Morella remains in the same apartment. In 7 months, the state has managed a great deal, issued her first ever identity document, arranged a pension, certified her degree of incapacity, opened 3 criminal proceedings, placed the case under national-level monitoring, and still couldn't open one door. Criminologist Paweł Moczydłowski put it this way: a system that for years didn't see its own citizen. They weren't living underground. I can't recall a case like this. That's an important qualifier, because similar cases do exist. A person without documents doesn't appear in databases. A person without insurance doesn't appear in medical records. A person withdrawn from school before adulthood disappears from educational registries. If, on top of that, they never file anything themselves, the system simply doesn't see them. Not out of malice, because it's built to respond only to incoming signals. Morella didn't send signals. Or she did, but not to the places equipped to read them. The blanket they started throwing out on the day of hospitalization, the mother who never once came to the hospital, the words on the stairwell about the beautiful renovation she hadn't seen in 20 years, the request to return home from a person who had just relearned how to hold a fork, the screams behind the door, after which the patrol would leave empty-handed. Those were signals. The system just wasn't calibrated to receive them. The shame that began with ailing legs at 15, that explains why she didn't go out. But shame doesn't explain who failed to treat those legs for 27 years. Shame doesn't explain the wounds, doesn't explain the cleanup that began the very day she was taken away. The investigation hasn't closed those questions. It continues. And Morella is in the same apartment, in the same city, behind a door that, once again, doesn't open. And somewhere right now, there is likely another door like it, behind which no one is sending signals either, because they don't know it's something you're allowed to do, or because they've already forgotten how. What do you think about this story? Let us know in the comments. Like, subscribe to our channel. See you next time.